B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Yoma Daf Lamed Vov. We're going to start from the Mishnah, 4 lines from the bottom of Daf Lamed Hey Omid Beis. Says the Mishnah, Bo loy eitzel pori. At this point in the Avodah, the Kohen Gadol is now dressed in his white clothes in the big day Lovon, and he's going to start the next part of the Avodah. The Kohen Gadol comes eitzel pori towards and stands next to his bull, the one that was going to atone for his Averis and for his family's Averis. Uporoi haya oimed, and where was his bull? Where was it standing? It was standing between Beina Ulam la Mizbeach, between the Ulam, which was the entranceway into the Heichal, and the Mizbeach. Now the Ulam was very wide, as was the Mizbeach, but as we've learnt, the Mizbeach was somewhat moved to the left, to the Dorim of the Ulam, and between the Mizbeach and the Ulam, that's where his bull would be standing. Roishoi leDorim, the head of the bull was towards the Dorim, Uponov leMayriv, and the face of the bull was facing Mayriv. The Gemara is soon going to discuss how can that be. Make up your mind. Was he facing Dorim? Was it facing Mayriv? V'hakoyin oimid b'mizrach, and the Kohen was standing closer to the Mizrach than the bull. Uponov leMayriv, and the face of the Kohen, the Kohen Gadol, was facing Mayriv. V'seimich shtei yodav olav, he would lean his two hands on his bull, umisvada, and he would do vidui, he would make his confession. V'kach omer, this is what he would say. Ono Hashem, he was beseeching Hashem, he would say Hashem's name. Ovisi poshati chotosi. Ovisi is doing Averis intentionally. He says, I may have transgressed and done Averis intentionally. Poshati, I may have even done it from a rebellious place. Chotosi, or even by mistake sometimes. Lefanecha, before you, ani, myself, the Kohen Gadol, ubeisi, and my home, my family. Ono Hashem, we're beseeching Hashem, kaperno, atone, forgive and atone, la'avoinos v'lepshoim u'lechatoim, to the Averis we did intentionally, to the Averis we did from a rebellious place, and for the Averis we did by mistake. She'ovisi u'she'poshati u'she'chotasi lefanecha, ani uveisi, kakosov b'soiras Moshe, as it says in Toras Moshe. In the Torah we received via Moshe Rabbeinu on Sinai, Avdecha, Moshe your servant. And what does it say in the Torah? Ki bayoyim hazeh, on this day, referring to Yom Kippur, Yechaper aleichem l'tayr eschem mikol chatoseichem lifnei Hashem tithoru. That's what the Kohen Gadol would say. V'hein oinin, and all the people who were there, who were witness to this and heard the Kohen Gadol making his confession, they would answer acharav after him, Baruch Shem Kvoid Malchusay La'olam Voed. Since they heard the Kohen Gadol expressing, verbalizing Hashem's name, they would all say Baruch Shem Kvoid Malchusay La'olam Voed. Says the Gemara, Man shomasle de Omar bein Ulam lamizbeach tzofin. And this goes as follows. We assume that the bull was standing where it was standing, and that because that's the place, even though we haven't yet discussed it, we've only discussed the leaning and the confession on the bull, we have not yet discussed the place of the shlita, but we're going to learn later that the confession was done where the smicha, the leaning was done where the shlita was going to be done. And we know that the shlita of any kodshay kodshim has to be done on the tzofo side of the Azara, which means from the center, any place, there's a tzofo inside, the whole, so to speak, right-hand side of the Azara, which was from the middle of the entrance of the Ulam until the wall of the tzofo. Now, the Azara itself had a number of different areas. We've discussed them previously. When we first walked through the Shar Nikanor into the Azara, there was the 11 Amos of the Ezras Yisrael. And then the Ezras Yisrael had a Tzofan side and a Dorim side. And then the next 11 Amos into the Azara was the Ezras Koyanim. Again, there was a Tzofan there and a Dorim. And then there was the 32 Amos of the Mizbeach. There was the Tzofan of the Mizbeach. And then there was on the Dorim of the Mizbeach was where the ramp was. So there's again Tzofin and Dorim. And then there's beyond the Mizbeach, between the Mizbeach and the Ulam, where again the area is split into Tzofin and Dorim. Kodshay Kodshim must be shechted al Yerech HaMizbeach. It must be shechted at the foot of the Mizbeach on the Tzofin side. So everybody agrees that the main place, the most opportune place where Kodesh Kodeshim should be shechted is on the tzofin side of the Mizbeach. How about the tzofin side of the Azorah? Before the Mizbeach, further Mizrach to the Mizbeach, where the Ezras Yisrael and Ezras Kohanim was. How about the tzofin side of the Azorah beyond the Mizbeach, between the Mizbeach and the Ulam? Can one shecht Kodesh Kodeshim there? And this is going to be a three-way machlokas we're about to see now. And the question is that our Mishnah that says that this bull was standing bein ha'ulam lamizbeach, obviously it was standing from halfway line towards the tzofin, because it was on the tzofin side. The Tana of our Mishnah must hold that even beyond the mizbeach, not just adjacent on the tzofin of the mizbeach, but beyond the mizbeach, between the mizbeach and the ulam, on the tzofin side of the Azorah, was also considered tzofin, and one can shech the Kodesh Kodeshim there. Man Shomaslei, who is this opinion? So let's see the three opinions. Well, before that, the Gemara says, Rabbi Loza b'Reb Shimon he. For some reason, the Gemara assumes it's the opinion of Rabbi Loza b'Reb Shimon. Of the three opinions we're about to see, let's work it through. The Tani we learned in a brisa. Says the brisa in Zvochim, Eizahu tzofin. What is considered tzofin? So it says the brisa, Mikir shel mizbeach, from the tzofin wall of the mizbeach, tzfoini, the mizbeach, Mikir shel mizbeach tzfoini, from the tzofin wall of the mizbeach, va'ad kaisel Azorah, all the way till tzofin, or till the wall, the tzofin wall of the Azorah. Ukeneged kol ha-mizbeach, and for the width, the whole 32 amos of the mizbeach, from the wall of the mizbeach until the wall of the Azorah, that is definitely considered tzofin. That is called tzofin. Divrei Rabbi Yosi b'Rabbi Yehuda. That's Rabbi Yosi b'Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosi b'Rabbi Yehuda took this at face value, that the only place called tzofin is where the yerech ha-mizbeach, at the foot of the mizbeach, those 32 amos adjacent from and adjacent to the mizbeach, all the way to the tzofin wall of the Azorah. That's tzofin, and it's the only place that Kodesh Kodeshim are allowed to be shechted. Rabbi Loza b'Reb Shimon, Moisif, Rabbi Loza b'Reb Shimon says, of course that's called tzofin, but I'll add even something else. Af bein ulam lamizbeach. If you go to a place which seems to be even more kodesh, even closer to the heichal, which is between the mizbeach and the ulam being the entranceway into the mizbeach, that whole area from the halfway line, from the middle of the entrance of the ulam, tzofin, is also considered tzofin. So our Mishnah is clearly not following the opinion of Rabbi Yosi b'Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yosi b'Rabbi Yehuda, if you put the bull bin olam lamizbeach, you can't shecht it there. It's not called tzofin. According to Rabbi Loza b'Reb Shimon, he says that even bein ulam lamizbeach, the tzofin side of it is considered tzofin, and you can shecht Kodesh Kodeshim there. So our Mishnah must be following Rabbi Loza b'Reb Shimon. However, there is a third opinion. Rabbi Moisif, Rabbi says, not only is parallel to the mizbeach, like Rabbi Yosi b'Rabbi Yehuda says, and not only closer to the heichal, like Rabbi Loza b'Reb Shimon says, but even further away from the heichal than the mizbeach. Rabbi Moisif, af mokim drisas raglei haKohanim, v'af mokim drisas raglei Yisrael. That whole area called Ezras Yisrael and Ezras Kohanim, which is the area before the mizbeach, also on the tzofin side of the Azorah, is considered tzofin. And then we have to understand, we assume that Rabbi agrees. If he says that Ezras Kohanim and Ezras Yisrael is called tzofin, of course the area closer to the heichal after the mizbeach is also considered tzofin. So our Mishnah could be following either Rabbi or Rabbi Loza b'Reb Shimon, and we'll soon have to see why in the Gemara said that it's Rabbi Loza b'Reb Shimon. But in the meantime, the brisa continues. Avol min hachalifois v'lefonim. But, and as we know that the ulam itself, the entranceway into the heichal, was much wider than the heichal, and on the right, far right, that means the far tzofin corner of this ulam, and the far dorim corner of the ulam, there was little two chambers. They were called the shar hachalifois. The chalif is the knives where they would which they would shecht animals with, and those two chambers were the edge of the ulam and within the area of the ulam. So what the brisa is saying is from beyond and adjacent to the ulam itself, it means the ulam itself on the tzofin of the ulam and beyond towards the ma'ariv, all that is not considered tzofin, it's not considered yerech ha-mizbeach. Avol min hachalifois v'lefonim hakel moedim sheposel. Everybody says that if you shech the korban beyond the most mizrach wall of the heichal, of the ulam, that it's not considered tzofin regarding shlita of kodesh kodeshim. Says the Gemara, now we're coming back to what we said on the second line of the Gemara. Having seen this brisa, where you've got Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda who says that tzofin is only flash with the mizbeach, the Mishnah certainly cannot be following Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. And then you've got Rabbi Lobenstein Shimon who says explicitly that Bein Ulam LaMizbeach is considered tzofin. So the Mishnah is Rabbi Lobenstein Shimon v'lo Rabbi and not Rabbi. Because Rabbi says only Rabbi, whether it's only or not we'll see in a minute, but Rabbi says that it's the Ezras Yisrael and Ezras Koyanim which is considered tzofin, and Rabbi doesn't make explicit mention of the area between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. Says the Gemara, no. Afilu Teimer Rabbi. Even Rabbi will agree that the area between the Mizbeach and the Ulam is considered tzofin, and one can check kodesh kodeshim there. Because Rabbi hashta ad Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda moisif, ad Rabbi Lobenstein Rabbi Shimon loy moisif. If Rabbi already says that even an area further mizrach, further away from the heichal, then the Mizbeach is considered tzofin, which means ad Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda moisef, that not only flash with the mizbeach, but even further mizrach is considered tzofin, then of course he's also adding to Rabbi Lobenstein Rabbi Shimon. That means he's going to agree to what Rabbi Lobenstein Rabbi Shimon says, that the area closer to the heichal, ben ulam lamizbeach, is certainly also called tzofin. And if so, since we assume that Rabbi is also agreeing that between the mizbeach and the ulam is considered tzofin, then our Mishnah could be following Rabbi as well as it could be following Rabbi Lobenstein Rabbi Shimon. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you why I assumed that our Mishnah is probably Rabbi Lobenstein Rabbi Shimon and not Rabbi, even though they both agree that the area between Ulam LaMizbeach is called tzofin, and one can share to smicha on the korban and shech the korban in that area. Anan hochi kamrinam. Because if our Mishnah was Rabbi, just say that the bull of the Kohen Gadol could be standing anywhere on the tzofin side of the Azara. You don't need to point out it's Bein Ulam LaMizbeach, because Rabbi says not only flash with the Mizbeach, and not only Bein Ulam LaMizbeach, but even from the Mizbeach all the way till the Mizrach wall of the Azara, till the Shar Nikanor. If so, just say anywhere tzofin in the of the Azara. Noikme b'kulei Azara. Elomai, Rabbi Lobenstein Rabbi Shimon. From the fact that the Mishnah specifies Beina Ulam LaMizbeach, we take it for granted that it's the opinion that says Beina Ulam LaMizbeach and doesn't say further Mizrach than the Mizbeach, and that's the opinion of Rabbi Lobenstein Rabbi Shimon. Says the Gemara, V'noikmei bein Mizbeach u'lekoisel. Okay, you want to say that the Mishnah is following Rabbi Lobenstein Rabbi Shimon, but even on that we have a question. Why does the Mishnah say, and why was the fact, why did they put the bull Beina Ulam LaMizbeach, which is also considered tzofin? Why didn't they put the bull Beina Mizbeach u'lekoisel? Why didn't they put it flash with the Mizbeach, and then it would even be Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda? Put it flash with the Mizbeach, because flash with the Mizbeach, that is the main Yerech HaMizbeach, that's the main place that the Kodesh Kodeshim is supposed to be shechted. Why are you saying don't put it where it's supposed to go? Put it Beina Ulam LaMizbeach, which is also considered tzofin. Put it where it's supposed to be ideally. Elomai Yitzchok Lameimar. What are you going to say? You Rabbi Lobenstein Rabbi Shimon. Even according to you, why is the bull Beina Ulam LaMizbeach? Okay, we understand it's allowed to be there, but why are you putting it there? Because you want it to be the closest to the entrance of the ulam and the entrance of the heichal, in order that the blood of the korban that was going to be carried into the heichal should be less distance, because the Kohen Gadol was weak from the fasting, and we didn't want him to have to walk too much distance. And that's why, even according to Rabbi Lobenstein Rabbi Shimon, it could have been al yerech hamizbeach, on the tzofin of the mizbeach, nonetheless we say it's been ulam LaMizbeach. If so, says the Gemara, le Rabbi Nami, say the same according to Rabbi. It could be that the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi. You're going to ask, according to Rabbi, just say that the bull could stand anywhere in the tzofin of the Azara. No, Mishum Chulcha de Kohen Gadol. Maybe the reason the Mishnah says that the bull should be Beina Ulam LaMizbeach is to impress on us that because of the weakness of the Kohen Gadol, stand the bull as close to the entrance of the Heichal as possible. And therefore the Mishnah could be not only Rabbi Lobenstein Rabbi Shimon, the Mishnah could also be following the opinion of Rabbi. Continues the Gemara, And this takes us back to the Mishnah. Roishei ledorim, the head of the bull was facing Dorim, uponov lemayriv, and his face was facing Mayriv. How can the bull be also facing Mayriv and also Dorim? Says the Gemara, Omarav ba'oikem esreishei, that the animal was, the back of the animal, the tail of the animal was towards the tzofin, the head was towards the Dorim, but it turned its head to face the Mayriv. Asks the Gemara, why don't you let it stand straight and just let the animal stand with its head facing Mayriv and its tail facing the Mizrach? Omar Rabbi says, I'll tell you why. Because if the tail of the animal is facing Mizrach, and let's remember the animal is standing bein ha'ulam lamizbeach, which means that the tail of the animal, the back of the animal, would be facing the Mizbeach. And what might happen is, yarbitz glolim, it will sprinkle some dung from the back of the animal, and it will be facing the Mizbeach. And that's very much not according to the covet of the Mizbeach. And therefore, the animal would not be facing, the back of the animal would not be facing the Mizbeach. And Rashi adds on, and even more than that, the actual back of the animal was not even flash with the Mizbeach. Bein ha'ulam lamizbeach was a very large area, and the back of the animal was actually further tzofin than the tzofin most point of the Mizbeach, and just the head of the animal was between the ulam and the Mizbeach, and that's how it would do smicha. Continues the Gemara, Tonu Rabbanon. Keitzad Seimich, and this is now talking about not necessarily Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, it's talking about all Kochi Kochim, that they would do smicha, they would lean on the animal, and they would do the video, they would confess on the animal. Well, let's see what it says in the Brisa, in the Tosefta. Tonu Rabbanon. Keitzad Seimich, how does one do smicha on Kochi Kochim? Hazevach oimed b'tzofin, the animal, the korban, stands on any area called tzofin. We discussed before what's called tzofin, but any area where immediately after the smicha they'll be able to do the shlita. So it must be on the tzofin. Kochim have to be shechted on the tzofin. Uponov lemayriv, and the face of the animal is facing the Mayriv. And Rashi adds here that the back of the animal is actually facing the Mizrach. Not like we saw by the bull of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim, where the animal itself, its back was facing Tzofin, and just its face of the animal was facing Mayriv. No, all other Kochim was not done bein ha'ulam lamizbeach, and therefore there was no issue of Yarbitz Glolim that would be facing the Mizbeach, and therefore the animal would just be facing, the head of the animal facing Mayriv, the back of the animal facing Mizrach. V'aseimich oimed b'mizrach uponov l'Mayriv. And the person who was doing smicha, his back would be towards the Mizrach, and his face would be facing Mayriv. And he would put his two hands of the person doing the smicha, leaning on the animal, would put his two hands in between the horns of the animal. He has to make sure there's no separation, nothing interfering between his hands and the animal itself. He has to be directly on the animal, and he would confess. Now it depends which korbanos. There's a korban chatos, korban osham, or korban oila. So al chatos, if he's doing smicha on a korban chatos, avoin chatos, he would say a confession which is appropriate for the chatos he's bringing. Val osham, if he's bringing korban osham, avoin osham, he'll confess for the avera that this osham is being brought for. Val oila, and if he's bringing korban oila, then he'll confess avoin for the avera of leket. Shikha or peo. Leket means the halacha that when a person in his field is harvesting his field and a few stalks fall down, leave them. Let the poor person take them, don't go back and fetch them. Shikha is if you have a whole rima of produce, of stalks, and you left one in the field, leave it for the poor people. Peo is if you, at the end of harvesting your field, leave one corner for the poor people. And these three, Rashi says, are not included in the vidui. That one says that when in the Beis Hamikdash they would say a vidui, that I've done everything I should with my produce. These three things are not mentioned. Maisa Rishon is mentioned there, Maisa Oni is mentioned there, but But leket shikha peh is not mentioned there, and therefore the korban oila would atone for that. For the aveira of leket shikha peh, u'maisa oni is removed twice. We don't have that in our version of the Gemara because maisa oni is actually mentioned in the vidui maisus, as Rashi brings. Divi Rabbi Yossi Aglili. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds that the averas of leket shikha peh are not included. They're not similar to any other lav. You don't get malchus for them, and therefore if you want to have atonement for it, you need to bring a korban. Which korban is it? The korban oila atones for it. Rabbi Akiva says, Ein oila ba elo alasei va'alo yisaseh shenitik lasei. Rabbi Akiva argues with the Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and he says that korban oila only atones for either a mitzvah's asei that a person didn't do, or a type of mitzvah shlita said that Malchus doesn't atone for. He doesn't get the lashes because it's a lav shenitik lasei. It's a lav that one removes the severity of the lav and the punishment of the lav by doing a mitzvah asei. For example, if you steal, you're not allowed to steal. Lo signov, lo sigzol. But if you do, v'heishiv v'segzela, give back what you've stolen. That's a lav hanitik lasei, and there are many other examples. So lav, where the Torah says don't get lashes, just repair the lav by undoing the lav, so to speak, by removing the lav, by doing an asay, then there's no malchus. How do you get atonement for that type of lav? It's with the korban oila. So that is, we have a machlokes Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva, whether an oila is mechaper for leket shikha peh, or whether it's mechaper for regular mitzvah asay and a lois asay lav hanitik laasay. Asks the Gemara, what are they actually arguing about? What is the point of the argument between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Aglili? And says the Gemara, so Omer Rabbi Yirmiyah, we're going to have machlokes Rabbi Yirmiyah and Abaya. Rabbi Yirmiyah says as follows. Rabbi Yirmiyah says that they're actually arguing belav de nevela, regarding the lav of an avela, and we'll see they're not only arguing by the lav of nevela, but what's happening, the way that they are going to view leket shikha peh is similar to the way they're going to view nevela. What's the story by nevela? It says in the pasuk that you're not allowed to eat a nevela, and it says afterwards, what should you do with a nevela? After it says the lav of eating it, it says what you should do is you should give it to a ger and leger asher b'sharecha. That is the lav. Now that's the asay. Sorry, that's the asay that's printed in the chumash after the lav. But it's not a lav anitik lasay. Lav anitik lasay means if you transgress the lav, fix it by doing the asay. Over here, how do you transgress the lav of nevela? By eating it. Once you've eaten the nevela, you can't give it anymore to the ger asher b'sharecha. So it must be that there's two things. There's a mitzvah asay. What should you do with a nevela? A mitzvah asay, give it to the ger asher b'sharecha. And now, what's the lav? You yourself don't eat it. So that's what the pasuk must be saying. There's no other way of understanding that asay. It cannot be a lav hanitik lasay. However, the asay is written after the lav, not before the lav. And that's going to be a discussion. How are we viewing this? Rabbi Akiva Sovar, lav ma'al yehi. Rabbi Akiva says that regarding nevela, it's a regular lav, even though immediately after the lav there's an asay. But since the asay cannot be fixing the lav, the asay is telling you what you should have done. And instead of being over the lav, you should have given the nevela to the ger asher b'sharecha, and you didn't. So you have a lav. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva says this is a regular lav, and therefore you get malchus on the lav, and since that's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Sovar. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says lav ma'al yehu. It's not a regular lav. A regular lav is one where there's no asay written after it. Here, virtue of the fact that it's written in the chumash, the asay after the lav, is in order to impress on us this is not a regular lav. And says Rabbi Yirmiyah that according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, if somebody were to eat nevela, he's not going to get the malchus. Ein loikin. And exactly the same way as according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Akiva says that by nevela, even though the lav is written, even though the asay is written after the lav, we know it's not a lav anitik asay, it's viewed as a regular lav. And Rabbi Yossi Aglili says no. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that since it's written after the lav, it's not a regular lav. The same will apply to leket shikha and peah. Even the asay of leket shikha and peah is written after. First it says v'leket katzircha lo yiselakit elo la'oni tazvenu v'lo yislaktenu. And so Rashi brings here the psukim and says that the asay of leket shikha and peah, or some of them at least, is written after the lav. According to Rabbi Akiva will say, even though it's written afterwards, the asay is probably referring not to lav anitik asay. It probably means that don't take the leket shikha peah for yourself, rather give it to the oni, like by nevela. Don't eat it yourself, rather give it to the Legera Asher B'Sharecha. So Rabbi Akiva says that the lav of leket shikha and peah is a regular lav, and he'll get malchus for it. And since you get malchus for it, there's no reason for the korban oila to be mechaper for it. The malchus will be mechaper. However, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, this is all according to Rabbi Yirmiyah so far, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that it doesn't matter whether the asay that's written after the lav of leket shikha and peah, whether it's an asay that's a nitik asay or not nitik asay. He'll say even if it's not a lav nitik asay, because it could be a lav nitik asay, it could be that the pasuk is saying don't take it yourself, and if you do, like v'heishiv azagzela, give it back to them. So it could be a lava nitik asay. But Rabbi Yirmiyah says even if it's not a lava nitik asay, even if you'll convince me and you'll say that the pasuk is saying give it to the geir instead of taking it yourself, and the asay is just telling us what you should have done, in which case it's a normal lav. However, since the asay is written in the chumash after the lois aseh, it's not a normal lav, like Rabbi Yossi Aglili says by nevela, and therefore you don't get malchus for being over on the lavim of leket shikha and peah. If you don't get malchus, who's going to atone for it? Says Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that's what the korban oila atones for. That's how Rabbi Yirmiyah understood what's going on here. That the main machlokas was by nevela, when you have an asay recorded after a lois aseh, and the same would apply to leket shikha and peah. Abaya argues with Rabbi Yirmiyah. Abaya says no. The kule alma lav de nevela lav ma'al yahava. And this is the only halachic difference that we see here between Rabbi Yirmiyah and Abaya. Abaya says that even Rabbi Yossi Aglili will agree that nevela is a regular lav. It's so clear that legera shebesharecho titnenu v'acholo cannot be going to fix the lav. The asay cannot be fixing the lav. It cannot be a lav anitik asay. Even Rabbi Yossi Aglili will agree that it's an asay telling you what should have happened before you did the lav, and therefore if you transgress the lav, it's a regular lav, and you'll get malchus. Not like Rabbi Yirmiyah said. So what they're arguing about here, what the Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Aglili are arguing about is betazoiv. The mitzvahs asay that it says, that it's written in the Torah after the lav of leket shikha and peah, when it says tazoiv, you should leave it over for the poor people. They're arguing that this tazoiv is written after the lav, but is the pasuk telling us what to do if you transgress the lav, and then it's a lav anitik asay, or is the pasuk telling us what you should have done instead of transgressing the lav? What you should have done is tazo, you've left it for the poor person. And that itself is the machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Aglili. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah, then it doesn't matter, even if it's clear that it was not a lav anitik asay. Nonetheless, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, since it's written afterwards, you won't get malchus. However, here we're saying no. The only reason that you won't get malchus is if you say that it's a lav anitik asay, which means that it's written afterwards to impress on us that if you transgress the lav, fix that by tazoiv, by giving it back, leaving it, put it back and give it to the poor person. Then it's a regular lav anitik asay. The Rabbi Akiva says tazoiv mi kora mashma. Rabbi Akiva says that tazoiv, even though it's written after the lav, it's not telling us what to do if you transgress the lav. It's telling you what to do instead of transgressing the lav, which means that when you transgress the lav, it's not a lav anitik asay, and he'll get malchus. And if you're going to get malchus, I don't need the korban oila to atone for it. Rabbi Yossi Aglili argues and says, Sovar, hashta mashma. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that the reason that Tazov is written after the Torah records the lav of is to impress on us that if you transgress the lav, you can undo it, you can fix it, you can remove the lav by doing the asay. It's a lav anitik asay. If it's a lav anitik asay, there's no malchus. If there's no malchus, I need to have the korban oila to atone for it. That's Abaya's understanding of the machlokes of Akiva and Rabbi Aglili. Continues the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanon. Keitzad misvade. What is the formula of the confession of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim? What did we see in our Mishnah? In our Mishnah it says, "V'kacha ya'omer." This is what he would say: "Ono Hashem ovisi poshati chotosi," which is three different types of averos. Ovisi is amazed, is doing something intentionally. Poshati is doing it not only intentionally, you're doing it in order to rebel. It's much worse. And then is the chotosi, which is a shoygig. But that's going to be a discussion here in the Gemara. It's machlekes tonu rabbanon to brisa. Keitzad misvade, how does the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim, how does he confess? Ovisi, poshati, v'chotosi. That's exactly the order it says in our Mishnah. V'chein b'soira mishtalech, and also regarding the goat that's going to be sent to the Azazel, where the Kohen Gadol is going to do another video. We're going to see there's going to be 3 viduim. But on the video, on the soira mishtalech, it says explicitly, what does it say in the pasuk? V'samach Aaron esteyodov al roish hasoir hachai v'esvada olav al kol avonos b'nei Yisrael. He confesses for the averos of the whole of Klal Yisrael. V'eskol pisheim. So it first mentions avonos, eskol avonos, and then it says v'eskol pisheim. The pisheim, that's the pesha, is the rebelliousness, and then l'chol chatoisam. Those averos they did by mistake. So the same order that it says in our Mishnah regarding the bull, when he confessed for his own averos and the averos of his household, is the same as the pasuk says regarding the averos of the rest of Klal Yisrael that was confessed upon the so'ir hamishtalech. V'chein b'Moshe, we find another source by Moshe Rabbeinu hu omer. It says in the pasuk, Noitzer chesed lo'alofim noise ovoin ofesha. After they did the egel, noise ovoin, Hashem carries, Hashem forgives ovoin v'ofesha v'chato. First the mazid, then the mered, the rebellion, and then the chato, the shegig. Divir Reb Meir. So that's the opinion of Reb Meir, and that's the opinion of our Mishnah. That's ovoin, pesha, chato. Chachomim oimrim. The Chachomim say no, it can't be. It doesn't make sense. Avoinos elu azdoinos. What is an ovoin? It's the averos you did willfully, but intentionally. It's amazed. V'cheinu oimer. Where do we see this from? From the pasuk, Kidva Hashem bozo ves mitzvosoi heifar hikoris tikoris hanefesh ahi avoino bo. He gets chorus for doing an ovoin, and it must be he did it intentionally. It's amazing. Pshoim, when it speaks about the pesha, what is that? That's rebelliousness. Elu hamerdim, those who rebel. V'cheinu oimer. It's a pasuk in Melachim. Vayelech v'yishlach el Yoshafat melech Yehuda leimer melech Moav posha bi. The Melech, the king of Moav, he rebelled against me. V'oimer, and there's another pasuk that says, "Vayifsha Edom mitachas yad Yehuda ad hayom hazeh." Vayifsha means, and then the pasuk carries on, "V'oz tifsha livno beisahi," and then Livno, name of a place, rebelled at that time. So you see that pesha is rebellion. L'chol chatoisom. What's a chatos? Elu hashgogos. That's if a person does an avera by mistake. V'cheinu oimer, and we see that in the pasuk. Daber el bnei Yisrael leimir nefesh kisecheto. That's the term of chet. Bishgogo mikol mitzvos Hashem asher lo yisasenu v'osa me'achas mehino. So you see that chatos, chet, is for shoygig. So says the Chachomim u'me'achar she'svad el azdoinos v'lamirdim. Once the Kohen Gadol is already asking for forgiveness and to be atoned for the averos that are done intentionally and via rebelliousness. He's now going to ask for those averos that were done by mistake. Of course, if even the averos that were done intentionally are atoned, then of course the averos that are done by mistake. So it wouldn't make sense to mention chatos at the end. The Chachomim argue with Reb Meir, and they say that the formula, the term, the nusach of the vidui was chotosi, ovisi, uposhati. First the chotosi, the averis that I did by mistake, and then vovisi, those I did intentionally, and then poshati, those that I did from a place of rebelliousness. Lefonecho ani ovesi v'chulu. And now the Chachomim bring a few proofs to this. V'chein b'David, David HaMelech also hu oimer. David HaMelech said, in Pasuk in Tehillim, Chatonu im aveseinu, he'evinu, Hiroshonu. which is again the order is first chatos, then ovain, and then the resha, which is similar to the pesha. V'chein b'shloima oimer, and also regarding Shloima Melech, the pasuk says in Melachim, "Ve'yishivu el libam ba'oretz asher nishbu sham v'shavu v'hischanunu elecha ba'eretz shoveim leimer chatanu v'he'evinu roshanu." Again, so you have the chatos, and then the ovain, and then the resha. V'chein b'Daniel oimer. It says the pasuk by Daniel says chatanu v'avinu hirshanu u'moradnu v'soynu mitzecha mishpatecha. So you see there also first chatos, then ovain, then the resha and the pesha. Elomau she'omar Moshe. If so, how do you understand that Moshe Rabbeinu after the Egel said noise ovain v'fesha v'chato? How do you understand that Moshe first mentioned those that were mazid and mered, and only then mentioned the mistakes? Because what Moshe was actually saying to Hashem was not asking for forgiveness for three different categories: mazid, mered, and shogeg. No, he was asking forgiveness just for the mered and the mazid. But Moshe was asking Hashem how to view the mazids. He said, when Klal Yisrael do Averis before you, and then they repent, they do tshuva, view the Averis they did, b'mezid, view them as if they were a shogeg. So it's as if Moshe Rabbeinu said, noise ovoin v'fesha, you should forgive the ovoin v'fesha and view it as if it was chata, as if it was just a mistake. So that's the Machlekes Rameya and the Chachomim. Omar Rabbi bar Shmuel Omar Rav was said in the name of Rav. Halacha is Kedivrei Chachomim. The halacha that what the Kohen Gadol would, the nusach of vidui that the Kohen Gadol would say in Yom Kippur is like the Chachomim: first chet, then ovain, then pesha. Says the Gemara Pshita, what's Rav coming to impress on us? Yochid v'Rabim, halacha k'Rabim. It's an old rule. Whenever you have an individual arguing with more people, it is the majority. And the halacha is like the majority. Of course, the halacha is like the Chachomim and not Reb Meir. Says the Gemara, no. Rav was coming to impress on us that Ma'odetei Ma'amer thought mistaber Taimid Reb Meir, that the reason to follow Reb Meir is to come Masayilei Kra, because Reb Meir brought a posuk that seemed to back up his opinion. And what posuk was that? That's the posuk we saw at the beginning. That it says Ve'esvada Olov Eskol avoynos b'nei Yisrael ve'eskol peshem l'chol chatoisam. So when it's speaking about the vidui of the soira mishtaleach, we saw explicitly in the pasuk that the term, or it seems from the order of the psukim, that he would first say avoin, then pesha, and then the chatos. So I may have thought that that's a reason to follow Reb Meir, because he brings in this context a pasuk, Kumash Malon. We'd not go with the word Domesha, Kumash Malon. So Rav was coming to impress on us that even though Reb Meir had a pasuk, the halacha is like the Chachomim. Says the Gemara, Hu denoch is kamei de Rabba. There was this shliach tzibur on Yom Kippur. He was saying the Yom Kippur Avodah, and in front of Rabba. V'ovad k'Reb Meir. And whilst he was saying the Yom Kippur Avodah, he said like Reb Meir, that first he said Ovoin, then Pesha, and only then Chata. Omar Lei. So Rabba said to the shliach tzibur, Shavkas Rabbanon v'ovdas k'Reb Meir. Are you rejecting or leaving the opinion of the Chachomim and following Reb Meir? Omalei, the Shliach Tzibur said, yes, Reb Meir spherically I hold like Reb Meir. K'dechsiv b'seifo yiraisa to Moshe, like it says in the Chumash of Moshe Rabbeinu. And indeed, that's the pasuk that Reb Meir brought. V'svada olov al kol avonos b'nei Yisrael v'eskol peshem l'chol chatoisam. Continues the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanon. We learned in the Brisa. V'chiper. The pasuk says, "V'hikriv Aaron es parachatos hasheloi v'chiper ba'adoi uvad beisoi." This is the bull that Aaron HaKohen did vidui on, he confessed on, and this would atone for his averis and the averis of his family. It says in the pasuk, "V'chiper" would be atoned. The question is, or the Bryce is assuming that b'kaparas dvorim akos of medaber. Since the pasuk says that he would have an atonement, we assume that after the vidui, as soon as he says and verbalizes his confession, that's when he's atoned. Says the Brayse, Ata omer b'kaparas dvorim. You say that the atonement took effect when he did the dvorim, when he said the words, when he confessed. Maybe it's only by the zrikas hadam when the blood is going to be sprinkled. Harei anidon? Says the Brayse, no. We're going to learn Gzera Shava. Ne'emar kan kapara. It says here regarding the power of the bull, it says v'chiper ba'ado yuvad beiso. It uses a term of kapara. Ne'emar V'nemro la'alon, and regarding the soir, the goat that's going to be sent to the Azazel, the soir mishtaleach, the pasuk also says the term kapara. V'asoir asha'ol olav ageru la'azazel yomot chai lifnei Hashem lechaper olav l'shalach oisu la'azazel amidbara. Ma kapara ha'amura b'soir dvorim. In the same way as regarding the soir that's mishtaleach, the kapara is clearly taking effect when he says the confession. Af kapara ha'amura b'par is dvorim. So too the kapara of the par of the bull is also, it takes effect as soon as he says the vidui. V'im nafshach loimar. If you're going to try and refute that, you're going to try and bring proof from elsewhere differently. We don't yet know where this would be. The Gemara is going to tell us soon. Then says the Brisa, I'll bring you another pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'hikriv Aaron is parachatos hasheloi, v'chiper ba'adoi u'va'ad beisoi, v'shochat is parachatos hasheloi." The pasuk explicitly says that from this pasuk it says v'chiper ba'adoi u'va'ad beisoi, even though the par has not even been shechted yet. It says v'chiper ba'adoi u'va'ad beisoi, v'shochat is parachatos hasheloi. So you see clearly that that the kapara, the atonement, takes effect even before the shchita. So it cannot be the zrikas adam, which is the bringing the kapara. It must be the dvorim. Asks the Gemara, "My im nafshach loimar." We brought gzera shava kapara that we learn the par from the soir hamishtalech. That over there, it's clear that there's no zrikas adam there. So the same way as over there, it's the dvorim which is mechaper. So also it's the dvorim by the bull. But then the Gemara says, no, maybe I'll learn out from elsewhere. What would you learn from elsewhere? Says the Gemara, we're going to learn later that there's a goat, that the avodah was done inside the soir apnim. Where over there, the atonement is clearly done by the domim, by the blood, by the zrikas adam. So I may have thought that you learn out from the soir hanase bifnim that so too regarding the bull of the kohen gadol, the kapara is the zrikas adam. For that the Brisa said, that from the pasuk itself we see that we can understand that the kapara is even before the shlita. It must be the words of the confession that brings the kapara, and not necessarily the zrikas hadam. And Rashi brings regarding that soir hanase bifnim, why is it so clear to you over there that the kapara is coming from the dam and not from the words, from the confession? So Rashi says, number one, the pasuk there says explicitly that the kapara, it's written after the zrikas hadam, not before. And also that on that soir and nasa bifnim there was no vidui, there was no confession. So over there it must be that the atonement came from the dam. So we thought that we learn, instead of learning kapara, the par to the soir amishtalech, we learn the par to the soir nasa bifnim, that the kapara is from the domim, not the dvorim. That's what the Brisa says. No, that the sequence of the pasuk here by the par makes it clear that the kapara is before the shchita. It must be the dvorim, not the domim. Continues the Gemara. And we saw in the Mishnah that how did the kohen gadol say the vidui? He would say ono, a formula, term used for beseeching, please, Hashem. He would say Hashem's name, and then ovisi poshati lefanecha, as we've seen. U'minayin sheba ono. What would be the source that this confession has the words ono? Says the Gemara, nemakan kapara. It says over here in the pasuk kapara, as we've seen. V'nemar la'alon b'chayrev, and it says later on by the egel, it says ulay achapro ba'ad chatoseichem, that Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to have a kapara for Klal Yisrael for the egel. Ma lahalon, in the same as over there by Har Sinai, but after the egel ba'ono, it says in the pasuk ono choto omazeh afkan, so too here ba'ono, so too we learn kapara, that from Chayrev we learn that also by the vidui of the kohen gadol he used the term ono. U'minayin shebashem, and what would be the source that you refer to Hashem by one of his names, by his name when saying the vidui? Nemar kan kapara. Again, here it says kapara. V'nemar be'egla arufa, regarding the egla arufa, which is the calf that was beheaded when somebody was found murdered in between two cities. They didn't know who murdered him. Then the elders of the city that was closest to that point would take a calf and behead it. That's called an egla arufa. There also it says in the pasuk, Kapir la'amcha Yisrael ashapodisa Hashem, it says the term kapara. Ma la'alon b'shem, in the same way as over there, by the egla arufa, it says, Kapir la'amcha Yisrael ashapodisa Hashem. Hashem's name is mentioned. Afkan, so to here, the kapara is done by, or is one of what terms that are used is b'shem, we mention Hashem's name. Okay, so that means we have over here by the Kohen Gadol, Ono and Hashem. The Ono is learned from Moshe Rabbeinu. The Hashem is learned from Egla Rufa. So Omar Abaya says that it's interesting that the Brisa only addresses the vidui of the Kohen Gadol, that how do you know you say Ono, how do you know I say Hashem? The Brisa could have addressed by Moshe Rabbeinu, the Pasuk explicitly says Ono, but did Moshe Rabbeinu use the term Hashem? Should he have used the term Hashem? Like by Egla Rufa, and the same by Egla Rufa. Hashem's name is mentioned. What's with the Ono? What is that? Is that mentioned? Omar Abaya, Bishlei Mechorev me Egla Rufa lo yal. If we understand that the Brisa didn't go out of his way to try and understand whether you can learn from Egla Rufa, that Moshe Rabbeinu could have or should have used the word Hashem, because the Brisa doesn't need to go into that. Maida hava, because it's no longer relevant. Whatever was done was done. Elo Egla Rufa Teiluf Mechorev. Why does the Brisa not say that in the same way as we learn from Chorev to Kohen Gadol, for example, that you say Ono, you should also learn from Chorev to Egla Rufa, that you should use the word Ono. And are you going to say that you're right? We do learn from Chorev that even by Egla Rufa you say Ono, in the same way as we learn from Chorev that by Kohen Gadol you say Ono. And indeed, by the Egla Rufa, the elders said, the Ono, not only they used the term Hashem, they also used the term Ono. Are you going to say that? The Mishnah seems to say not this way. Mishnah in Masechet Daf Memvav. It says in the Mishnah, HaKoyanim oimrim, it wasn't the elders who said it was the Koyanim. The Koyanim said, Kapir la'amcha Yisrael asher podisa Hashem, etc. Ve'ilu ba'ono lo ka'omar. The Pasuk tells us what they said, and the Mishnah there doesn't say that you also say Ono. The Mishnah just tells us that the Kohanim said the words it says in the Pasuk, that they mentioned the word Hashem's name, but they didn't mention Ono. And says the Gemara Kashya, indeed, that has to remain a question. We don't know the answer to that. Continues the Gemara. V'hein oinin acharov. The people that were there in the Beis Hamikdash who heard the Kohen Gadol mention Hashem's name, they would respond, Baruch Shem Kvoid Malchusay La'olam Voed. Says the Gemara, Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, in a Mechilta, Rabbi Omer. Rabbi says from the following pasuk, Ki Shem Hashem Ekra, when I call Hashem's name, Havu Goydel, give greatness Leilukenu to Hashem. Moshe was telling Klal Yisrael that B'shah Shani Mazkir Shmoish LaKadosh Baruch Hu, when you hear me mentioning Hashem's name, Atem Havu Goydel, you should bring greatness to Hashem. And this would be alluding to the saying Baruch Shem after hearing Hashem's name. Chananya ben Achi Rabbi Yeshua Omer, that from a different pasuk, the pasuk says Zeicher Tzadik Livracha, V'Shem Rashoim Yirkov. So when it says Zeicher Tzadik Livracha, what does that mean? Omar Lohem Novi Li Yisrael. The Novi, it's a pasuk in Mishli, but the Novi was saying to Klal Yisrael, B'Shah Shani Mazkir Tzadik Oilomim, when I mention Hashem, who is the righteous of all the worlds, is the Tzaddik Elomim, Atem Tnu Bracha, you should give a bracha to Hashem. And again, this is alluding to what it says in the Mishnah, that you should say, when you hear Hashem's name, Baruch Shem Kvoid Malchusay La'olam Voed. And Yimirat Hashem, in the next shiur, we're going to learn the next Mishnah.